Hello, welcome back to 40 Days with the Fathers. Today is day 2 of the book, which is the Epistle of Mathetes to Diognetus, chapters 1 to 6. So it's a new text because the Didache was so short. So who is this? This is actually an anonymous author. Mathetes is not a name, but it's a Greek word for a disciple, addressed to a certain Diognetus, who is otherwise unknown to us. There was a Diognetus who was a tutor of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, but he is not likely the actual recipient of this letter. Possibly one of the earliest examples of a Christian apologetic. And if you're unfamiliar with that word, an apologetic is just simply a formal defense or justification against or for something. So it doesn't mean you're saying sorry. So this was possibly one of the earliest examples of an apologetic, defending the faith from its accusers, written to someone interested in learning about the faith more and its customs. Interestingly though, the term Jesus or Christ is not found in this letter at all, as the author seems to prefer the use of the word instead. Why? The Christian faith was ridiculed and under attack in the early centuries. Many things about the church were misunderstood, and so various Christians took to writing apologetics, defences, to clarify the doctrines and prevent beliefs from being maligned. When estimated between AD 130 to the late 2nd century. The reading today is a particularly interesting one, as the author is contrasting the faith and practice of Christians against Greek and Jewish worship style and practice. Although what I did find a little odd at first is how this book, and others from the same time period, Jewish beliefs are often referred to as Jewish superstitions. In this context, the author is referring to much of the traditional practices of the Jews that we'd recognise as being from the Torah. To us reading this today, that type of phrase may sound quite harsh, or even disrespectful even, but it's a word that has changed in its definition slightly over time. In modern English, superstition is defined as excessively credulous or irrational belief in supernatural influences. Whereas in ancient Latin usage, superstitio, if I'm saying that right, could mean the same as our modern understanding, but also has a secondary meaning of improper worship of the true God. This is in contrast with the proper worship and awe of God, or the gods, religio, this is where we get our word religion from. So, just to clarify a bit. Religio is proper worship of God. Superstitio is improper worship of God. So within this context, the early Christian writers speaking of Jewish superstition were possibly referring to the fact that the Jews rejected Jesus as the Messiah, and thus were no longer worshipping God the Father in a proper manner anymore. The author goes into some depth of explaining the vanity of idols and how they are objects created by people and out of the materials we see and use every day, and thus are no more special or worthy of honour. He invites Diognetus to contemplate the substance and the form of those whom you declare and deem to be gods, because is not one of them a stone similar to that on which we tread, or brass, or wood, or silver, or iron? These so-called gods are no more divine than the material that they are made from, and all can rot or rust or be stolen. Christians, then, are hated on account of this because they do not deem these objects to be gods, the author explains. This then leads on to how Jewish worship, although correct due to it also rejecting idols, is still no better than the examples of madness which the Gentiles exhibit. This is because the Jews still observe similar things to the idol worship by offering an act of folly than of divine worship. Through their sacrifices to God, supposing that they can give anything to him who stands in need of nothing. This, in the author's mind, is no different than conferring the same honour on things destitute of senses. And as such, all forms of Jewish worship, from observing the Sabbaths to circumcision and new moons, are utterly ridiculous and unworthy of notice, unlike the Christian practices which abstain from the vanity of and error common to both Jews and Gentiles. Harsh words. This reading then finishes with a description of how Christians live and intermingle with society, yet are distinct from the world around them. I found this challenging and wondered if the description still applies to what we see in the churches today. So I'm going to read a slightly long quote from the text to emphasize that point. The Christians display to us their wonderful and confessedly striking method of life. They dwell in their own countries, but simply as sojourners, I can never say that word. As citizens, they share in all things with others, and yet endure all things as if foreigners. Every foreign land is to them as their native country, and every land of their birth as a land of strangers. They marry, as do all others. They beget children, but they do not destroy their offspring. They have a common table, but not a common bed. They are in the flesh, but they do not live after the flesh. They pass their days on earth, but they are citizens of heaven. They obey the prescribed laws, and at the same time surpass the laws by their lives. They love all men and are persecuted by all. They are unknown and condemned. They are put to death and restored to life. They are poor, yet make many rich. They are in lack of all things, and yet abound in all. They are dishonoured, and yet in their very dishonour are glorified. They are evil spoken of, and yet they are justified. They are reviled and blessed. They are insulted and repay the insult with honour. They do good, yet are punished as evildoers. When punished, they rejoice as if quickened into life. That's the end of today's reading. I hope you enjoy it still, and you are following along. So don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it, subscribe. See you next time.